Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wisdom Seeker Live podcast for this week. And glad to have everyone with us. Hope that you will, as you join, that you'll tell us where you're joining from, and plus, definitely ask questions, make comments as we go along. And we are always start our show with a an explanation of how we see wisdom in Wisdom Seeker podcast. And wisdom is a journey that is a three-step process, if you will. And this journey starts with gaining knowledge. And we can gain knowledge from lots of different sources and ways, formal, informal. And we will hopefully seek to get some knowledge every day. One thing I like to advise, though, is that many people stop with knowledge and think it's power, and it's not. It is the starting point towards wisdom, and but it is not the place we need to stop. And the second step in that process is to gain understanding or experience, and we take our knowledge that we've picked up and begin to use it and to make choices related to it, to begin to solve problems, begin to find ways to do things better. So that is the second step in our process, and it becomes where our knowledge goes from being just facts or data to a place where it is becoming personal and meaningful in our life. And then the third step in this process is when we go from knowledge and understanding and into wisdom. And the difference is from knowledge and understanding is our perspective. And wisdom is gaining a perspective that is much bigger than ourselves, much bigger than our immediate circumstances, as well as it is a time where we look outside of our own needs and begin to see people around us and the world around us from a different perspective, a much larger perspective. And when we do that, we begin to make different choices because we see the effects of our choices, our solutions that we apply in our understanding. We will see them differently. And for those of us that have a spiritual bent, the way we like to think of that is that we begin to see the world and those in it and around us through God's eyes. And that includes, of course, seeing ourselves through God's eyes. So that's the journey that happens when you begin to seek wisdom and gain wisdom. And so welcome, Wanda. Glad to have you this morning. And others that are joining, hope you will let us know who you are and where you're joining from. And it looks like we may even have someone joining from either Facebook or on YouTube. Thank you for being here too. So the topic today came up at a suggestion of one of our regular attendees for the Wisdom Seeker podcast. And it was about how do you deal with situations in your life and in particular work when you have people above you that are not making the best choices for you or for your team or organization. You've got somebody that's being more of a boss than they are a leader. And so the question was, how do you address that? And our normal thoughts in the way of addressing it is either to live with it and just put up with it, which a lot do, especially in a work environment, because we are concerned about reacting and losing our job, or we have another response that we consider as part of it, and that is to simply rebel. Say, no, not going to do it. I'm not going to do what you said. And at that point, of course, we're risking job, we're risking reputation, and so on. And then, of course, one that is becoming a popular choice in these situations is to quit and say, well, I'll do something else, whatever that something else um, is, and we will just walk away. Or related is quiet quitting, which is becoming popular, and that's where we don't quite quit our job, but we quit being a good employee in terms of giving it our best and doing more than is necessary. So those are the usual responses that we think of as being our only options. Well, the fact is that there's another option, and it's a skill that has been around for centuries. And the challenge is we've lost this skill. We've lost how to use this skill to encourage and help our situation. And this skill, by the way, as I teach leaders, I teach them concept of leading upward. And that means influencing the people above us to become better leaders, or to at least support us in our being leaders in our role as part of an organization. And this skill that I'm referring to is making an appeal. And there is a way to go about it, and go about it well, to excuse me, have the desired effect that we're looking for. Making an appeal is a very powerful option when we know how to use it well. Now, the challenge with making an appeal is that there has to be some background or support components, or there's a foundation to using this skill, because using this skill without knowing how and without having the right attitude in the process can be quite a problem, because people will recognize that our appeal is not a solid appeal, not based on solid character and foundation. Welcome, Zaid. Glad to have you with us today. So let me start by telling a bit of a story, if you will, in regards to this skill or this principle. And that is about a young man named Dan that became employed with this organization and was moving right along. And he had caught the eye of people above him and was doing quite well. And as he grew in his role and moved along in that process, he was given more responsibility and more position. And so he was rocking along in his career very nicely. And when he got to a point, he was moving on up into the higher levels of the organization. The CEO of this organization decided that one of the perks was to help them with some of their life needs, which one of those was including a meal plan or food options that are available. And it included, though, a certain expectation in terms of those food. Wanted this young man to be in that role and be able to wine and dine with people and eat and entertain and so on. And so the challenge was that part of Dan's background was Dan had realized that he had a certain kind of diet that kept him healthy and well. So he was beginning to face a dilemma, because what he chose to eat and found best for him didn't fit into the culture of this organization. And it was going to create some conflict. And even the word on the street was that to not be a part of this lifestyle could have detrimental effect on the position that he had attained. And so he's going, trying to figure out what to do. And of course, one of the options he considered was, well, I'll just tell him I'm not going to do it and see what happens. And so that's one that he considered. The other was, like we talked about before, of rebelling against the situation and just trying to force change in the organization to meet his needs. And in fact, he had some other friends that were moving along in the organization as well and were facing the same dilemma. So that was another option. Dan chose not to take that option. And then another one would have been to quit or quiet quitting. And in this organization, that wouldn't be tolerated. You'd immediately lose your job. So Dan decided that he would make an appeal to his immediate report, his team leader or supervisor, whatever term you like to use in this case, and made an appeal and said, what I've found is that I am healthiest and at my best when I eat this certain way and live this certain way. And when I do that, I stay healthy and strong, and I'm in a better place to be able to do my job and to help the boss look good and to be more productive and all that. And said, if you would, please, went with a very good attitude and respectful and said, can we try this out? And I will continue with my diet and my lifestyle for a period of time. And you see if it works. See if I'm still able to do what I need to do to take care of the needs of the organization and influence people and be able to bring them along to our ideas and meet our need as an organization, and just test it out for a short period of time. And if it works, then allow me to continue as I would and do what I am doing and living and eating the way I should. And if not, then if it doesn't work, then I will give in and I will go your route. I will do what is being asked and be very supportive of it. Or at that point, if I'm not able to do that, then I will move along and give someone else the opportunity to be in this role. So his immediate report decided, okay, we'll try this. And so they allowed him to try it. Well, at the end of the period of time where they had agreed upon, Dan was doing good. He was moving along. He was helping out, getting the KPIs and everything accomplished, and having good relationship with the people he needed to, even those that chose a different way of going about things. And so it was working really well. And so in the end, not only did Dan get the right or opportunity to be able to continue in the way that was best for him and helped him do what he needed to, but it became an opportunity for others as well, so that the culture shifted a bit to allow others to be able to have some more freedom and flexibility and different kind of expectations, not just from a rule standpoint, but from a culture standpoint. And that was because Dan, rather than the other options, chose to make an appeal. Now, and it worked out in this case. And the challenge is, though, that Dan, first of all, had really given this a lot of consideration rather than just making a knee-jerk reaction to the situation. And also, frankly, Dan spent some time praying about this situation, meditating on it to know and to seek out wisdom how to approach it. Another thing that Dan had done is Dan had proven to his leadership around him that he was very capable, and that he not only was capable, but was capable with a good attitude, and had demonstrated that and had a track record. So Dan wasn't going in just as somebody that was always wanting to do something different and be difficult or whatever. And then Dan also had chosen to approach this rather than this is my right and I'm going to demand it, but rather a humble attitude, make an appeal. And he approached it with respect. He approached it with humility, and chose his words well, and considered, what could how could he demonstrate that what he was doing or wanted to do would ultimately accomplish the goals, accomplish the intents of the people above him, his supervisor and the CEO of the company, and so on, and really gave it consideration. He also, part of this consideration was that his lifestyle was about conviction, something that was very important to him, or as we refer to in today's world, his core values, and had really considered those as well. And so he had this background from which he made a choice to make an appeal and used the skill of making an appeal well. So making an appeal is another option that we have in our situations. Now, you have to understand, making an appeal is not a guarantee that you're going to change the people that have set this culture or established a rule or whatever. It's not a guarantee. And you actually risk losing your job or being picked on or ostracized. And that is certainly a challenge that we face. And so you have to realize that using an appeal has value, and quite often it is effective. But we have to be willing, and this was part of Daniel's mindset and approach, was he was willing to accept if it didn't go his way. He had that attitude and a humble approach to things as part of the process. And we can maybe talk about other things, including, in fact, tomorrow, Anton and I are going to talk about dealing with the loss of a job that kind of dovetails into this. But making an appeal is a skill that I encourage anyone and everyone, especially if you're in a leadership role in an organization or in your life, that you have to work with others and report to others that may not be in the situation that you find to be the best. And so the other part of what Dan did is he also made sure he understood what the organization needed to accomplish, wanted to accomplish to be successful as an organization. And he had realized that and determined that his vision, his direction was in line with what the organization needed to do and its purpose as well. So making an appeal is about right attitude, right mindset, and right approach. And it involves also, though, establishing that as part of the culture that we're in, that we are contributing, that we are a valuable part of what's going on. And not only recognizing it, but also accepting that we have brought value, he brought value to the organization, and that his role and purpose being there was established, and it was beyond his own selfish interest, but also the interest of the organization. So we have to be sure, if we're going to try to use an appeal to make a change in our situation, in our work, in our life otherwise, and any situation where someone that is above us, if you will, or in a leadership or boss role, whatever, however you want to look at it, we have to be sure that we are prepared well to make such an appeal. And when we do, it is very common that we influence things in a good way and make things happen, and begin to be able to stay with our core values, and be able to also move forward in what we're doing. Now, be careful, because part of this situation and the core values involved are not just I'm trying to look out for number one. I'm trying to be only about my self-interest. And that's part of the challenge we face in a lot of situations, is that rather than approaching things not only from the standpoint of what's my purpose and my vision, but how does my purpose and vision tie into the organization and help get what the organization needs accomplished as well. Good morning, Rick and Sharon. Glad to have you guys with us. Sorry, I got sidetracked, caught up in what I was talking about. And excuse me, Sharon shares a comment, says, I found that it's how you approach the person and situation makes all of the difference. In this case, Dan did not demand it. He asked his manager and gave the manager a chance to make a decision that would be beneficial. Indeed, you are so right, Sharon, and that approach is part of making an effective appeal. And part of that mindset is being humble in our approach, not saying, going to somebody and say, hey, do this or else. That's the wrong attitude. And if you approach it, you're probably going to get your or else option come to light and come to life, if you will. And so how we approach it is key. And what's real interesting about this is that if you're in an environment where it is a true leadership situation, leadership culture in an organization, whether it's work or some social organization or community organization, whatever, if they've already got good leadership, then your role as the person involved dealing with situation is to be sure and communicate and have the right attitude and share about your vision and core values and how you see them contributing to the organization that you're part of. And, one of the challenges we face, especially in the work world, is a mindset of who's got the upper hand. And, the company that we're working with thinks they've got the upper hand because they're offering you a job, offering you to pay. And there's some truth to it, because they have risked their time, their money, their resources to develop this company. And that puts in a position that they can take the approach of, hey, I'm offering you a job, I'm offering to pay you, and so I'm offering you something. And a lot of times in that situation, many of us don't recognize the value that we have as a person and the value we bring to the organization. We just approach it that, well, this is my right to have this. And so I'm going to demand my right as part of this. Like, for example, the area of quiet quitting. And when we approach it as a quiet quitter, we approach it with the idea in mind that okay, this is what I agreed to do these things, and I'm only going to do those things. And I'm going to demand my right to not do more than that because whatever, either I've got other interests or you're not taking good enough care of me, whatever it is, we approach it in that fashion and it's not effective. We have not proven or are not choosing to bring value on our own, and by the way, just by being present and employed doesn't mean that you've established your value as part of this organization. We prove or demonstrate our value through being excellent at what we do. And that's how we demonstrate a couple of things. One, that we recognize our value and our worth, and we live in it. And second of all, it contributes to the organization in a way that if we make an appeal about something, they don't want to lose us because we do bring value, not just value in production either. The more we bring value to the organization in terms of contributing to the culture in a good way, such as working well with other coworkers and demonstrating that right attitude and being an example of that, and being an example in general of being good as an employee. So again, appeal is very effective, but it also requires that we do our homework and that we are growing and being who we need to be. Because if we're doing doing what we need to be and do, then by that very situation, we are valuable and contributing to the good of the organization and to the good of the person that we are reporting to. Something else, by the way, that Dan had done along the way is he had also spoken to his leader and even demonstrated that part of his vision was to help that leader be successful. So what Dan was doing in this organization was not just about Dan. It was about the good of the people he worked with and the good of the organization. And part of the reason he was able to do that is that he understood his own design and purpose in life. And he knew that what he was doing had a purpose in it, and it was part of what the organization was trying to do as well. So appeal, if you're just joining us, we're talking about a principle of appeal and how to develop that skill and use it well to make changes to our organization when we seem to be in untenable situations. We want to be able to bring about a change because it's better for us and better for those around us and better for the organization as well. But somebody's not understanding that there's an alternate way to approach things. And so in this case, Dan, young rising star in the organization, had already started proving himself and was accomplishing good things and benefiting the organization. And then the leadership of the organization decided that they wanted to implement something new, and included, by the way, something in some ways benefited Dan, but in this case, it went against what he knew was best for him physically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually, and was concerned that to follow through as they had spelled out would be against his better judgment, against what he believed was his convictions and his core values. And so he faced the choices that a lot of us face. It's just that Dan chose to make an appeal. And by making this appeal, he changed the options available because of a couple of things. One, he approached it in the right attitude with humility and without only operating from a selfish standpoint. And then he also had understood that he was right, that in his core values, that he was going to be able to be a better employee if he was allowed to live these core values rather than having to be impacted by a change in the culture at the organization he's working with. So there is an option and it works, but it's if you're having trouble with it, consider that your approach may be, or your beef with the organization may be more self-centered than it is based on core values and the good of your ultimate good and the good of the organization. And check our attitude in that regard and approach it not with demands and not requirements or expectations, or in modern terms, entitlement, but approach it rather from the standpoint of, I'm here as part of this organization and I can bring value and will bring value, which includes doing so well that it positively impacts and reflects on the leadership of the organization. And when we approach it in that way, good things happen. And the other aspect is, if for some reason your appeal is not accepted, a couple of possibilities. One is that some change could occur that would keep it within your needs as part of your vision, part of your core values. Or worst case, at that point, you end up exercising the option or consideration of leaving and finding a different place. And I know in our current culture that a lot of us are afraid to make an appeal and face choices because we think, okay, I need this job, so I've got to go along and get along. The challenge is, and this is something that we all do well to learn, is that earning a paycheck is helpful and needed in our life. But at the end of the day, if it's going to harm us and make us sick, cause us to let go of our core values as a person, then, and by the way, in these situations, a lot of times we're miserable. So we have to ask the question, are we willing to do this at all cost? And a lot of people these days are beginning to make the choice of, no, I may have gotten this job. It may even pay really good. And but I'm not willing to give up my core values, my design and purpose, my vision, in order to have a job with this organization. And they have realigned their priorities as part of this process. And that's another reason that encourage us. A wise approach is to first understand our design, our purpose, and be asked the questions, does this align with this organization, whether it's work, whether it's church, community involvement? But the more we can go into those situations with that understanding, the more likely we are to avoid being in a situation where we have to make an appeal. Welcome, Lee. Glad to have you with us as always. And so, part of what I see as I look out is I see a lot of people that, for whatever reason, have taken roles on or jobs that don't align with their design and purpose and their core values. And for whatever reason, the appeal for big money, status in a company or organization, different motivators affect different people. But if that is the basis for being where we are, we've got a problem foundationally to start with. But if we are in the right place with the right organization, and people above us want to make choices culturally or policy wise that don't fit those core values and our vision and our design and purpose, then we are faced with a dilemma. And one of the, before we go to making an appeal, it's a good idea also to check, are we doing what we are there to do and be the best it can be? Are we excellent in it? Because especially these days and times, I can almost guarantee you that if you're excellent in what you do, which includes, and this is important, includes the right attitude, then you make yourself so valuable that dealing with these situations or making an appeal becomes much greater chance that it's going to be successful. But so, like I led into this topic of making an appeal and using that skill, we've got to be careful, though, that we have a good foundation going in. And if we don't have a good foundation, then we need to be working on our foundation as a person in what we're doing and understanding what our design and purpose is, and therefore what our vision and mission and values are. And so the question that led up to this was, well, what if you're working in a situation especially in a culture that is not based on leadership? I call it management style culture. And the management is always my way or the highway kind of approach. And as they approach making policies and establishing culture, it is quite often that their approach doesn't take others into account, that it's very self-centered or organizational centered. And so we're faced with a dilemma. How do we approach it? And as I mentioned, the traditional thought is we either accept it and live with it and be miserable, or we rebel against it with things like quiet quitting, approaches like that, or we say, enough of this, I'm gone, and walk away. And those are usually the approaches that we consider. Whereas what I am offering up is there is another approach, and that's through making an appeal. And Lee makes a comment, and it is so true, that attitude is the only thing we can really control. I thought it was really, this point was brought forward poignantly. I work with an education organization called International Institute of Influencers. And once a month, we have young people that are learning how to be effective speakers. It's called the International House of Speakers. And one of the young people, this person's about, I think, 12 or 13 years old, speaking on not giving up, and brought up one of my favorite sayings. And it is that life is 10% what we are given and what happens to us, and 90% is our reaction or response to those things. And that goes to Lee's comment, attitude is the only thing we can truly control. And, I've been down the road pretty good ways, and I have to agree. We control very little of our circumstances and in our environment, but we have ultimate control over our attitude. And in fact, Sharon makes a salient comment about it, and that is, attitude is gratitude, and and having that gratitude is part of it. In fact, as I think about this, part of making an appeal is that we are approach this appeal from a point of gratitude, that in fact we do have a job, and in fact we are getting paid. and that we have some opportunities. Hopefully, we're in the right place in our job or in our organizations and our roles, that we are in the right place to start with. Now, if you're not in the right place, the appeal may not be the key. The appeal may be a false way out. Whereas in that case, if we're in the wrong place and just for the sake of having a job or a paycheck or a position, it begs the question, do we need to be in a different place? And I know that's scary, and people become nervous and anxious over making those changes because we're so dependent on that job or that role or that even that paycheck, to a point that we sacrifice ourselves and our values to be there. And I would offer that we need to rethink that as well. And this is part of where seeking out wisdom in your life becomes important, because what happens is as we seek out wisdom in these situations, we see not only how it's affecting us and our value as a person, not our value, but as our purpose and our vision, how it affects us that regard, but also even how it affects others. And it may be that there are others that are being harmed by this policy or this culture that we're in, as we call it, even toxic culture. It may be that part of our purpose in being there is to be the one to be able to be that leader and make an appeal and to bring about change, not by rebelling, not by um, uh, expectations or entitlement or demands, but rather with the right attitude, approach, and make an appeal to bring about change. And we have lost that concept in our culture, especially the US culture. There are some cultures where the concept is still there, and people know how to make an appeal. But other cultures, it's getting less and less the case. But in making an appeal, we need to be sure that we approach it wisely. And again, another value in gaining wisdom in our life, because once we determine that we need to bring about a change, doing so wisely makes a huge difference. And if anyone's just joining us, again, the background to our conversation today, excuse me, is it came up about working in an environment, in a role, position where the people above us that we report to, that are managers, leaders, supervisors, whatever term you want to use, are not doing the right approach. Can we bring about change in that situation? And the traditional change options we think of is accepting and getting along, getting by, just so we don't have to lose our role or our paycheck or whatever. That's one. The other is a type of rebellion against it, and that's become in our current culture a thing called quiet quitting, or just doing what we have to minimum just so we can stay in the position, the role, whatever. The other one, of course, is just outright walking away, quitting, and that makes it hard because we're dependent on that role, position, or the paycheck it represents. So that's a tough one. And so what we're talking about today is a different option, and it's through making an appeal. And I told the example of Dan, rising star in this organization, moving along, and part of the culture that was shifting, if you will, was that these up and coming stars were going to be expected to live and eat in such a way to entertain clients and to build rapport and things like that. The company was going to provide the cost of that, pay for it and everything. But the expectation for Dan caused him to have to consider his core values and whether to give up some of his core values. Plus, in Dan's case, he had determined that he was healthiest and best if he were to live in such a way, which included his diet. And so he was concerned there. And he knew that he was in the right place with this organization to fulfill its vision, its purpose. And so he decided to make an appeal. And he approached his leadership team and said, okay, well, I understand that your goal here is to make it good for us, the people, and also for the organization. And we agree that that's what we want to do. And it just goes back to how we approach it. So he said, if you will allow me for a test period of time to do what is my convictions and my vision and my core values, and let's see if at the end, if I am in a best position to be able to contribute to the organization and make things move forward and accomplish what I need to. And if I'm also healthier myself, and let's see. So he made an appeal. He approached it with humility. He approached it with respect. He approached it having already demonstrated his value to the organization and that he was excellent in what he did. And so he made this appeal and was given the opportunity to prove himself. Now, the other part of it is that Dan had a high level of confidence that if he did this and that he was given the opportunity, the outcome he suggested would happen. So it can't just be that we make up something and say, well, if this, then that. It has to be that we have a high level of confidence that what we are saying is accurate. So Dan made the appeal. And at the end of the time, Dan was continuing to contribute and even do better for the organization. And he was healthier and strong as a result. And so the appeal changed the direction that this culture was going, not only for him, but for his colleagues, his other people in this organization. Let's see. Welcome, Richard. Glad to have you with us. And Richard, Lee had to take off. Lee, take care. Glad you stopped by. Richard's comment is, as sure as there's quiet quitting, a concept which I believe has been ill-defined, there's also quiet firing. Oh, yeah. One of the tactics that's used by organization is, and poor leadership, I would say management, not leadership, because leadership wouldn't do this. They will make situations untenable in order to get rid of you. And that's real. And so, yes, I agree with you. And again, part of making an appeal is understanding that we're in the right place to start with, and that we are in a place where we are fulfilling our vision and our core values as part of it. If that's not the case, then an appeal is probably not the best approach. And so thanks for that comment, Richard. Zaid makes a comment, says, this is my first to hear the story of Dan and the organization from this perspective. Kevin, you not only have the wisdom and skill in storytelling. Well, thank you, Zaid. Actually, it is not an original story to me. It is my approach in sharing this story. And this story has actually been around for many, many years. That's why I know it works. And I know that the principle of an appeal works. Sharon makes a comment, and that is, it really does make a big difference, Kevin. If you go into the situation with a bad attitude, you'll get nowhere. You're right, Sharon. We will not accomplish anything. And in fact, we're likely to harm our situation by approaching it with a bad attitude. Let's see. Richard makes a comment, says, attitude is infectious, both good and bad. It's up to us to use it and share it, even with those who don't have a great deal of experience with it. Indeed, Richard, one of the things as we approach an appeal, and this is an important part of attitude and consideration, is what we are appealing and what we're asking for. Is it motivated selfishly? If it is, it's going to be exposed as such. Whereas an appeal that happens, we can honestly go with that appeal, knowing that it's not just about us, but there are others impacted. In fact, in the story of Dan, he had a couple of other friends that were in the same situation that were being impacted by it. And so as Dan approached this, he approached it not just for his own well-being, but for the well-being of others in mind as well. And so, again, an appeal is another option to deal with situations in our roles, whether, again, it's work, family, community, whatever. There is such a power in making an appeal, and it is a viable option other than some of the ones we traditionally think of and approach it. And so we just really need to consider that there is an alternative. And as Rick puts it, a plan B. And sometimes a plan B really is our plan A. Part of a plan B, though, is our willingness to give up the situation and its benefits because of doing what is right and best for ourselves and for others. And that's part of the beauty of an appeal, is that we approach it understanding that ultimately we may have to walk away from it. And if we're not willing to do that in situation, our appeal is not going to be effective, because ultimately, rather than trying to force change on the leadership of the organization, we recognize that if they're unwilling to hear our appeal, that we may not be in the right place. We may need to go to another place to be and do what we need to do. And there are implications of that. I recognize paycheck in terms of so-called security in life and so on. But the other option that we look at is quiet quitting and getting along, and that's certainly a possibility. But it's generally miserable, and we usually are giving up, sacrificing our core values. Welcome, Brenda. Glad to have you with us, friend. I appreciate you being here. And so making an appeal is another option that many times we miss, or many times we attempt, but with the wrong foundation to make an appeal from. But again, as evidenced through time and story, there are indications that making an appeal can be very effective in accomplishing the goal at hand. And in this particular case, as I mentioned earlier, it was brought to my attention. It was actually Zaid, and because Zaid has some great ideas and has mentioned topics for a podcast. And the idea was, what do we do when we're dealing with people in an organization such as work or others, and they are not responsive to our needs, and they're putting us in a position of having to be miserable and or give up our values and our vision in order to be able to stay. And so we started talking about this approach of an appeal. And yes, Brenda, you're so right. It's is as important in how we ask than what we ask. But it's also important, and this is tough for some people because it's a challenge for them, that they find a struggle to even ask, much less ask in the right way. And sometimes the best thing we can do is get over our concerns and our risk and ask the question. And then when we do so with the right attitude and the right foundation, we can have an impact, not just for us, but for those around us. And that is ultimately, by the way, an approach and of a servant leader. I did not really throw that one in there, but the value of being a servant leader starts with us being a servant leader of ourselves. And when we do that, it opens up right approaches to better situations in our situations. We may never ever be a leader of other people, but we will have the option and should take the option to be a servant leader of ourselves. And yes, Brenda, indeed, a grateful heart is part of the foundation of making an appeal that's effective. Because when we choose to approach it with a grateful heart, grateful that we've got a job, grateful that we're making a paycheck, and grateful for an opportunity, that's part of the foundation of our approach in making an appeal, so that we don't have to just live with it and be miserable, or we don't have to sacrifice being excellent at what we do by approaching with a passive rebellion, if you will, of, well, I'm only going to do what I'm required to do to keep my job. Or the other option that we consider is just leaving. And there is a fourth available option available to us, and that's through making an appeal. And so, indeed, it is effective done correctly. Yes, I agree that we have to learn to lead ourselves first, Brenda, and that is a key importance. And that's true, by the way, in anything we do, whether it be a job, whether it's in volunteer, community, home, that's where it starts. And Brenda makes the comment, I believe you have to look at the bigger picture rather than making it about you asking. Indeed, as if you're going to make an appeal, it needs to be from a right foundation. And the right foundation is this not only good for me, but is it good for others around me and good for the organization? If that's not our desire to see that the organization accomplishes their vision and mission, and that our leadership above us accomplishes their vision and mission, then the question is rightly asked, am I in the wrong place? So consider a fourth option of how to respond to poor management, poor leadership in your situation. And that is to make an effective appeal to bring about change or prevent change, unhealthy change in our situation in the organization or whatever we're involved in. So learn about the principle of appeal. It's very powerful, and it can be very effective, as we learn from the story of Dan and his situation. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate your being here with us. I pray that you make it a priority to be a wisdom seeker in your own life, and that you begin to live from a place of wisdom, and that you're blessed this week, and that you will grow and be who you are designed to be. Thanks, everybody. God bless. Take care. We'll see you next week.